Hey guys, tonight we drift far from the hum of cities and streetlights, far from your phone's last flicker of Wi-Fi, into the wide-open hush of the Mongolian steppe. The air is dry, just on the edge of biting. You feel the wind press flat against your cheeks, tugging at the thin wool of your borrowed robe. Somewhere behind you, a yak grumbles. And in front of you, under the big bowl of a darkening sky, an old shepherd squats over a fire. He doesn't say much, just gestures to a cloth bundle beside him. When he unwraps it, you realize it's a goat's shoulder blade. Scrubbed white as bleached driftwood, though it's never seen the sea. He turns it over carefully in the firelight, tracing the faintest cracks with his fingertip. This, apparently, is how tomorrow's weather will be known. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fire crackles. A soft gust stirs dry grass. You settle down on a worn felt mat, trying not to think about how exposed everything feels out here. No walls, no roof, just wind and silence and sky. The herder lifts the scapula up toward the flames again, then sets it back on a worn wooden board shaped by years of smoke and prayer. He's preparing to read it divining weather from heat-fractured lines in old goat bone. It sounds like nonsense until you see the way his eyes narrow, like he's deciphering a puzzle you can't even see dot in Mongolian tradition. This is called kill divination, and it isn't a lost art still practiced in remote areas, especially by those too far from weather apps or radio towers to care about what meteorologists think. Instead, they trust the bone, or more, specifically, what the bone says after it's been burned just right. The first whisper from the steppe tonight is a lesson. Everything here is practical, even the mystical. You won't last long on this land if you can't tell when a snowstorm is coming. So, bones, they're just another tool. Still, you wonder, what do these cracks really mean? Are they all that different from cracks in pavement, or the way your phone screen shatters chaotic but patterned, seemingly random but hinting at stress and force? The herder, whose name is Timur, but whose grin suggests he doesn't expect you to pronounce it right, lights another small fire in a tin bowl, sets a different scapula above it. This one is new, raw, still wet with traces of marrow. He's going to prepare the bone for tomorrow. You wrinkle your nose slightly. It smells a little goatish. I burned this one last year, he says, tapping the first bone with his knuckle. Very cold night. Crack showed wind. Big storm came, the tourists cried. He laughs to himself, shaking his head. Apparently, weather trauma is funny. When it happens to city folk, you glance at the dark horizon, unsure whether you're also about to become a cautionary tale. But the old man isn't worried. His robe is patched, his hands cracked, but his posture is relaxed. He trusts the process. He trusts the bone. Historians still argue whether this method qualifies as true divination or more like folk meteorology and ancestral science shaped by generations of observations, encoded in tradition. There's no lab coat here, but there is data, stored not in spreadsheets but in stories. The concept goes like this. When you heat a fresh scapula over flame, it cracks along stress lines. Different crack patterns mean different things. A hairline fracture running toward the rounded edge might mean clear skies, a spiderweb pattern along the curve. Storms coming, and if the bone blackens too fast, don't even ask, just find shelter. The trick, though, is interpretation. This isn't a game of matching patterns to outcomes. It's part memory, part intuition, part whisper from the wind. Timur doesn't just see the crack, he feels it. Like a wine sommelier sniffing notes of blackberry in what just smells like red wine to the rest of us. And no, there's no official handbook. You don't get a laminated chart that says crack, northeast, meaning fog. It's all passed down orally, like your grandma's soup recipe that never tastes right, unless she's the one cooking it. While you sit there, trying not to fidget in the cold, Timur begins to hum. It's low, tuneless, but rhythmic. You can feel it in your chest. It sounds like something from before clocks and borders, before someone decided time had to tick instead of drift. Goats shuffle in the distance. Somewhere overhead, a star begins to blink through the haze. You try to imagine what it would be like to trust your survival to the reading of bone cracks. To plan your travel, your grazing, your whole rhythm of life around what scorched calcium, says Dot. It's kind of beautiful, actually. Terrifying, sure. But there's something grounding about it, too. About slowing down enough to really read the world around you even if the text is charred and cracked. You look back at the fire. Tincture is still watching the new scapula, waiting for it to fracture just right. You think about how many people and villages, even soldiers might, have waited by similar fires, hoping the bone would promise sun, or snow, or safety. He finally lifts the bone. It's split near the middle. He grunts. Rain? Maybe. And then he shrugs, like he didn't just casually change tomorrow's entire plan. You pull your robe tighter and glance again at the sky. Maybe he's right. Maybe the bone knows. The bone rests now, cooling in the bowl like some sacred relic. You lean in to study it, tilting your head just like Timur did, half hoping the cracks might speak to you too. But all you see are burnt streaks and warped shadows. Nothing screams, rain, or even whispers cloudy. It just looks like an old bone that lost a fight with a campfire. Timur catches your look and grins. The way someone grins at a toddler trying to do taxes. You don't see it yet, he says, handing you the scorched scapula. But maybe your grandchildren will. That's the thing about this whole tradition. It's not meant to be mastered overnight. The skill comes from decades of watching the sky, the goats, the fires, and yes, the cracks. You need time, patience, and possibly the same sheepskin robe for 30 winters. He points to one long hairline fracture that curves like a question mark near the edge. That one like the moon, he says. It means wind will come from the south warm, may be good for riding. You nod slowly, even though it still looks like bone to you. But the comparison to the moon helps. You start seeing the symbols for what they are, images, metaphors. The bone isn't a weather app. It's a canvas, a story, a map made of calcium. There's an art to reading these bones. Mongolian herders call the practice takilga, and though it's often done with scapulas, sometimes other bones are used to jawbones, ribs, even the flat forehead of a skull, in rare cases. Each offers its own terrain of meaning, its own vocabulary. Of cracks, the most common, though, is the scapula, precisely because of its thin, flat shape. Think of it as nature's version of a chalkboard, except this one talks back only when it's been through fire. You watch as Timur takes a different scapula from his cloth sack, this one clearly much older, yellowed with age, its edges smoothed by time. He calls it his memory bone. This one told me a story once, he says, as if referring to an old friend. Storm in the spring. Just like now. Same kind of crack. He holds it up beside the fresh one and traces nearly identical lines with a crooked finger. Same wind, same rain, same smell in the sky. You lean in to sniff the air, wondering what that even means, smell in the sky. But you catch a whiff of dry grass, wood smoke, and the faint grassy temps of nearby horses. You suppose if you lived here long enough, you could detect the mood of the weather by scent alone. Historians still argue whether this kind of bone divination was used exclusively for forecasting weather, or if it doubled as a form of broader spiritual communication. Some sources claim herders used the cracks to answer personal questions. Should I move my camp? Will my son recover from sickness? Will the wolves come this winter? In that light, the weather becomes just one piece of a larger cosmic conversation. Daily horoscope written in the fire chart, alphabet of bone. What's fascinating is that this practice didn't evolve in isolation. Across ancient China, Scythia, even parts of Korea and Siberia, similar methods were used, often called scapulamancy or osteomancy in academic circles. In early China, cracks on ox shoulder blades or turtle shells were used to predict everything, from crop success to royal marriages. Mongolian herders, though, never went quite so formal with it. No temples, no oracles, just a fire, a bone, and someone who knew how to listen. And here's the best part. There are still no rules, no official instruction manual, no YouTube tutorials. Even among shepherds today, interpretations vary. One man's storm omen might be another's sign to wash his socks. There's a particular joy in this subjectivity. It's not like modern meteorology, which aims for precision and consistency. Bone reading is more like jazz-on improvisation based on rhythm, instinct, and memory. Timur hands you another bone. This one completely clean, no cracks yet. Try, he says. Put in fire, watch carefully. Your eyebrows lift. You read a bone. But he nods again, dead serious. So you nestle the scapula into the tin bowl and poke a few embers underneath. The fire flickers, heat licking across the surface. You stare at it, waiting for something to happen, feeling oddly nervous like a student at a spelling bee with a word in Sanskrit. First, nothing. Then slowly, the bone begins to twitch. A small pop, then a crack, snakes across the surface, delicate as a thread. Good, Timur says. Look now. You lift it out with shaky hands, squinting at the new fracture it looks like. A river, a lightning bolt, a backwards S. Timur peeks over your shoulder. Maybe sun, maybe short rain. Hard to say, you're not ready yet. You sigh, a little deflated, but he claps you on the back, laughing. First bone is always shy. That night, you lie under thick wool, blankets, the smell of fire still in your hair, and dream of cracking bones and whispering winds. You realize something important. Even if the bones don't always get it right, they still mean something. They remind people to observe, to slow down, to pay attention to what the world is trying to say. And sometimes that's more useful than a 5-day forecast with cartoon suns and clouds. Somewhere outside, a wind picks up. You wonder if the bone was right. Morning arrives without a hint of ceremony. No birdsong, no trumpet of dawn. Just a slow lightening of the sky above the steppe, where the horizon stretches flat in every direction like an ancient, unmoving sea. You push back the blanket, stiff from sleep and the cold, and exhale into the crisp air. Timur is already up, of course. He's been awake since before you even dreamed of stirring. His silhouette moves among the animals, checking hooves, tapping, water troughs with a stick, calling to a calf that wandered too far during the night. You watch, quietly marveling at the absurd workload of being a nomadic herder. It's not just about weather reading and goat whispering. It's about survival in a land that seems constantly on the verge of shrugging you off. Because the Mongolian steppe isn't gentle. It doesn't coddle. This place has been dubbed land without fences, but it could just as easily be called land without mercy. Blizzards, droughts, sandstorms every year brings a different insult. One day, the air burns with summer heat. The next, snow falls in June, just to keep you humble. There's even a word, here's it, for a specific kind of ecological betrayal. A zood is a winter so brutal, so relentless, that livestock simply can't survive. And when your wealth, food, clothing, and even your fuel come from animals, a zood isn't a bad season. It's a personal apocalypse. You help Timur pile dung into the stove. It burns surprisingly well and doesn't smell nearly as offensive as you'd feared. Good winter means lazy spring, he says, motioning to the low grass. Too dry, see? You nod like you do, but truthfully, the landscape all still looks like dirt, and more dirt, maybe some distant shrubs. Still, you try to look concerned. The animals sense it before you do. The goats grow agitated. The horses are restless. Even the dogs, big, lion-maned beasts that seem part vof, part rug puff short warning, barks into the wind. You glance around, but the sky seems empty. Just that weird, endless blue that feels somehow too big. Storm coming, Timur says, matter of fact, as he tosses the remains of breakfaster charred bread puck into a sack. But the bone said just rain, you reply, and he shrugs. Maybe it changed its mind. This, apparently, is the second lesson in surviving out here. The weather doesn't care about your confidence. Historians still argue whether ancient Mongolians adapted to this erratic climate through sheer grit, or whether the root of their resilience lay in systems of predictive magic-like scapular reading that let them hedge their bets better than neighboring cultures. It's a chicken and goat situation. Were they better prepared because of divination? Or did they invent bone reading because they were constantly unprepared? You chew on that idea as Timur tightens the ropes on the pack horses today. You're moving camp. Not far, just a valley or two over, but far enough to avoid whatever this sudden shift in the wind might bring. Packing is an art. Everything folds. Everything fits. The gyre, their circular felt home, collapses into neat segments like a pop-up book gone minimalist. You're amazed how fast it all disappears first. The rugs, then the wooden struts, then the cloth roof. In under an hour, What had looked like a permanent home is reduced to 2 carts and a pile of ropes. You ride awkwardly, bouncing on a saddle that feels more decorative than functional, trying not to look like your legs are plotting revenge. Timur rides ahead, scanning the land. You've noticed he does this constantly, reading not just bones, but clouds, dust, even the way birds fly. It's a reminder that Mongolian herders don't rely solely on bone readings. They're constantly observing. They read the language of nature with the intensity of someone reading subtitles in a foreign film while holding a bowl of noodles. Miss a cue, and you might miss a life-saving change. The wind picks up. Not a gentle breeze this time, but a pushy, insistent gust that wants your hat and your balance. You squint toward the south. There, like a bruise blooming on the sky, is a wall of gray. Timur pulls his horse to a stop. He doesn't say anything, just watches. Then he reaches into a leather pouch and pulls out an old, well-worn scapula, the same memory bone from last night. He holds it up to the light, right there, on horseback, as if double-checking with an old friend. "This one lied," he mutters, but there's no bitterness in it, just acceptance. And here comes the third lesson. Even the bones are allowed to be wrong. That might be the most human thing about all of this. The knowledge that no matter how many generations have stared into crack lines or smoked the wind for signals, nature still has a wild card up her sleeve. The storm arrives faster than expected. One moment, dry silence. The next, hail slaps sideways. Into your face, bouncing off wool and saddle, horses shudder. Goats scream. You grip the reins and wonder if bone reading ever included a run-for-your-life category. Timur doesn't flinch. He clicks to his horse, motions toward a nearby ridge. And within minutes, you're ducking under an overhang of rock natural shelter, just deep enough to crouch. You sit there, dripping, stunned, watching the sky punish the earth. Timur is smiling. Actually smiling, as if this is all just part of the ride, see? He says, tugging his scarf tighter. You can learn from the bone. But the sky still wins. The storm doesn't last long, but out here, even a short blast can feel like a cosmic rebuke. 15 minutes of sideways hail, bone-rattling thunder, and wind that sounds like it's scraping its claws across the sky. Then it's over, like it never happened. You step out from under the rock ledge, blinking into the sudden stillness. Everything glistens. The ground steams slightly from the sudden temperature shift. It's eerie-like the land hit pause and forgot to hit play. Again, Timur just dusts off his sleeves and heads back to the horses, like nothing happened. You, on the other hand, feel like you've been slapped by a very large, very cold towel. He glances back at you and smirks. You're not dead. Good. Encouraging. Camp setup resumes as quickly as it had been packed. The felt gear is unfolded and stretched, the supports reassembled with the ease of someone doing it for the 10,000th time. You try to help, but mostly just succeed at getting in the way, which Timur doesn't seem to mind. He's used to people bumbling through their first migration. As you rest by the fire, later, sipping milk tea so strong it could legally qualify as cheese. He begins to talk about his grandfather, the man who taught him to read bones. Old man was a BB, he says. That's like a shaman, but also not. He waves his hand vaguely, as if even the concept is too slippery for words. In Mongolian culture, A-B-O umlaut. O umlaut isn't your classic crystal ball fortune teller. They don't wear robes with stars or ask you your zodiac sign. They are intermediaries. Between the physical and the spirit world, consultants for both weather and soul. If the bones were confusing, the B-O umlaut, O umlaut, was your translator. Timur's grandfather had the full toolkit: drums, bells, bone fragments, eagle feathers, and the ability to stare into a fire for so long that people started seeing things too usually. After one too many fermented mare's milk shots, you ask if Timur ever wanted to become a B-O umlaut himself. He snorts, "No, too much responsibility. Spirits are like family, always asking for things." You laugh, but then he adds more quietly also, "They don't always go away." That part lingers. Historians still argue whether the role of O umlaut, evolved strictly from shamanic roots, or if it merged over centuries with practical leadership roles: healers, counselors, meteorologists, even judges. In older times, O umlaut, wasn't just someone who talked to spirits, they were the town's general crisis manager. Which makes sense. Out here, everything is a crisis waiting to happen. If your livestock wander off, you starve. If a storm rolls in without warning, you could freeze in your sleep. If someone gets sick, the next hospital is a 3-day horse ride away. If the horse agrees, Timur says his grandfather once used goat bones to predict a sickness in the herd. He claimed the cracks looked like broken spines, a bad omen. Within a week, several animals had fallen ill. Was it real? Or was it a man so in tune with his land that his subconscious knew something his mouth couldn't say yet? Maybe both. You notice a new scapula sitting near the fire now, one that wasn't there before. It's freshly burned, with dark edges and 2 jagged lines crossing in an X. Grandfather's way of saying hello, Timur mutters without looking at it. He says it like he half believes it. Or maybe he just doesn't want to believe the other half. You realize that for many herders, bone divination isn't just about forecasting, it's about connection. To ancestors, to memory, to the invisible rhythms of the earth. You take another sip of tea, letting the heat loosen your spine. Outside, the sky's gone back to its usual neutral glare. Dry clouds float like lazy thoughts. Back in ancient times, Mongolian shamans, like Timur's grandfather, were respected and feared. Their ability to manipulate perception, to invoke dreams and predict events, gave them influence over whole communities. Even the great Khans were known to consult O umlaut, before major decisions. There's a story, half history, half folklore, that tells of a B.O. umlaut who saved a village from a devastating blizzard by burning the bones of a white goat and reading the cracks with such clarity that everyone packed up camp and moved before the snow hit. The storm buried the valley, but the people survived. Some believe it. Others say it's just a story elders tell to justify the goat shortage. Regardless, there's something undeniably magnetic about this practice. Something ancient and poetic. You stare at the bone again, and for a brief moment it almost does look like a message, an invitation, or a warning. Still want to learn? Timur asks, eyes glinting. You nod, even though your tea is now more cheese than liquid, and your boots are still wet from the storm. Good, then tomorrow, you make the cut. It doesn't explain what that means. He just stokes the fire, and hums that same low melody from the first night. It drifts through the gore like smoke, curling around your tired thoughts. Outside, the wind has gone quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but you're starting to learn that silence out here is just another thing to interpret. You lie down again. Closer to the hearth this time, wondering if bones really do speak, or if it's just that humans are always listening for patterns in the noise. Either way, tomorrow you'll try your hand at making the first cut. Dawn is sharp, the kind of chill that makes your teeth feel too big for your mouth. You wake to the sound of hooves and coughing yaks, and the low rumble of a kettle already boiling over the fire. Timur is outside, humming that same low tune, as if he's been up for hours, which of course he has. Today is the day you make the cut. You're not entirely sure if this is some kind of metaphor, rite of passage, or a practical instruction involving actual goat bones. Turns out, it's very much the latter. Timur hands you a freshly butchered scapulist. Slick, still faintly warm. It belonged to a goat that passed away during the night. Not by force, he assures you, just age. That, in Mongolian herder logic, makes it a worthy vessel for tomorrow's forecast. It's weirdly respectful, intimate even. Edge of camp, where the wind is lighter and the ground flat enough to work. He places the bone on a stone slab and pulls out a knife so old it probably remembers the Bronze Age. You need clean surface. All meat gone. No burn yet. You nod, trying to keep your city reflexes in check. The first touch of the blade makes your stomach squirm. There's something deeply strange about slicing down the soft tissue of a goat shoulder blade before breakfast. But then again, this isn't breakfast. It's a ritual, a preparation. It's what 1,000 hands before yours have done to read the sky. The fat and cartilage come away in ribbons, exposing a smooth, pale canvas. You're surprised how much work it takes. Your fingers ache before you're even halfway through. Slow is fine, Timur says, watching patiently. Fast means you rush the spirits. You're not sure if he's joking, but you slow down anyway. Historians still argue whether cleaning had deeper ritual significance, or if it was just, well, cleaning. Some sources suggest that in certain regions, The way a bone was prepared, what was left on, what was carved off could itself be symbolic, like framing the picture. Before painting the prophecy, you finish it last, your hands sticky and smelling like broth. Timur takes the bone, nods approvingly, and places it on a low rack to dry. "Tonight, we burn it," he says. Now you're grateful. You're also pretty sure you've lost your appetite for meat for at least a week. Later that day, you sit with several of the other herders around the fire. A few neighbors have arrived on horseback, word of your curiosity, traveling faster than you did. They want to see the foreigner who thinks he can read bones. You've become the day's entertainment. They start sharing stories of readings gone wrong. One man insists his father predicted rain once, beautiful cracks, perfect moon shape, but forgot to consider the wind. The storm hit their neighbor's pasture instead. The neighbor still brings it up, usually when borrowing tools. Another recounts a bone so deeply cracked it was taken as a sign of disaster. The herder moved his entire flock to a new valley. Nothing happened for 3 weeks. Then a swarm of locusts arrived and ate every blade of grass. The flock would have starved had they stayed. Coincidence? One man shrugs. Or maybe the bone saw bugs. The fire flickers with laughter. You're beginning to see that bone divination isn't just about forecasting, it's also storytelling. The interpretation is half tradition, half community theater. Everyone wants to believe their reading is accurate, but even when it's not, the act of reading gives meaning. And sometimes, that's enough. You ask if there's ever been a scapula that told something ... huge, like death or war. The group goes quiet for a beat, then Timur speaks. "Once, my grandfather burned a bone before the Russians came. 1930s. Crack ran all the way through, split it in half. He makes a slicing motion, said it was the land splitting, said many things would be taken, many would go silent. You don't ask what happened after that. The fire burns lower. In modern times, many herders still quietly use scapula reading, even if they don't admit it to outsiders. It's not superstition. They say it's observation. Reading a bone is no more mystical than watching how frost forms or where birds fly. Just another layer of nature's code. Still, there's an unspoken reverence for it. The way people touch the bones gently. The way they pause before interpreting. The way they remember who got it right and who didn't. You lie back on the ground, your hands still raw from scraping, your eyes tracing the swirl of stars above. The sky out here looks fake, like someone turned the resolution up too high. It's too full, too alive. And for the first time, you begin to understand why someone would trust a bone. Bones don't lie. They just fracture the truth. And if you're wise or patient, maybe you'll learn how to read the pieces. Evening comes, heavy and slow, like warm honey spilling over the edge of a bowl. The air carries the scent of smoke, horse sweat, and boiled milk. You sit near the fire again, that same flat stone, now bearing your cleaned, dried scapula, ready. To be burned, the whole thing feels oddly ceremonial. No one says as much, but the way the herders sit in a quiet semicircle, the way Timur hums and slowly sips from his wooden cuppet, all signals something sacred is about to unfold. Looks at you. You ready? You nod, though your stomach lurches a bit. This is your bone, your fire, your first reading. It's like being handed a microphone in a language you only half understand. He places the scapula over the flame, not directly in it too hot, too fast. Instead, it's balanced just above, resting on 2 stones. The heat will rise slowly, coaxing fractures rather than forcing them. You watch and wait. The bone begins to sweat, then crackle, a faint pop, then another. Hairline fractures begin to bloom across its surface, slow as moss, quick as lightning dot. It's strangely beautiful, like watching frost grow on glass in reverse. The lines shift and shimmer under the orange light. You feel it in your chest. Attention. Like you're being handed a puzzle made of smoke and history. Timur leans over and nods at the pattern forming. See that? He says, tapping gently with a stick. One long crack, too short, curved like a hook. You squint. To the east, he explains, means change. Wind is waking up. You try to see it, really see it, and maybe you do. There's something organic about the shapes, something that hints at movement, at direction. They don't look random anymore. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were passed down as symbolic languages, like runes or hieroglyphs, or if they emerged independently in each herder's mind, shaped by environment and necessity. There's no Rosetta Bone, no glossary, just generations of instinct, trial, and adaptation. Timur sits back. Your bone says something is coming. Not bad, just ... shift. He smiles like that's enough. Like anything more specific would be too much, you turn the scapula in your hands, letting the light catch the lines. They seem almost topographically like a map. You imagine tracing a journey with your fingertip, following the cracks to wherever the wind is headed. But the moment is interrupted by the sound of hooves on dirt. A rider approaches from the dark, moving fast. Everyone turns to look. Dismounts, breathless. Speaks quickly to Timur in Mongolian. You catch a few words. Oxen River, missing. Timur frowns, then looks at your bone again. Ah, that's the shift. He stands. Come, we ride. And just like that, you're swept up in a midnight mission across the steppe. The stars are so bright they cast shadows. You ride fast, wind tearing at your sleeves, hooves thudding across dry earth. You don't ask questions. You just follow the glowing edge of the herders' jackets as they vanish into the night. When you reach the riverbed, the oxen are already being rounded up. They'd wandered downstream, confused by some subtle shift in scent or moonlight or instinct. The herders move efficiently, roping and guiding without panic. Timur watches you as you dismount, your breath ragged, he says, nodding toward the bone strapped to your saddle. Good reading. You're not sure if he's serious. But part of you wants to believe it, that the cracks had whispered of motion, and motion came. That night, back at camp, you sit alone with your bone, still warm from the saddlebag. The fractures seem deeper now, older, like they've aged just from being right. You wonder how many readings like this go unrecorded. How many weather changes, animal movements, sudden illnesses, or even lucky guesses were quietly chalked up to bone patterns and the wisdom of the wind. You wander a little beyond the firelight, following a goat path that curls gently uphill. And that's when you see them bones, scattered across the grass, bleached by sun and time. They're not ominous. They're not even eerie, just there, part of the land. This is where you learn something unexpected. Mongolians often leave bones where animals fall. It's part spiritual, part practical, part aesthetic. To remove them would be to erase memory. And out here, memory is the only thing that can predict the future. Among the sun-bleached relics, you spot another scapula cracked, weathered, half-buried. You pick it up, turn it over. The cracks have faded, but the surface still holds echoes. Someone once read this bone. Someone once said, "Tomorrow will be warm," or "Snow is coming," or "Don't ride today." You look out over the hills, back toward the campfire's glow, and realize this place has been whispering to people for centuries. In bone, in wind, in firelight. You sit a while longer, the ancient scapula in your lap, the stars overhead crowding. Close, like curious eyes, you finally understand. The bone doesn't tell the future. It reflects the present, amplifies what you already know but haven't yet admitted. It's not magic, it's attention. And attention, in a place like this, is everything. You wake before the sun, not because someone calls you, but because the steppe itself seems to breathe differently. The air has a density to it, thicker, more silent. It's not just still, it's watching. Even the goats, usually grumbling and stepping on each other, are strangely calm, clustered together near the rocks. Timur is already awake, naturally. He's seated cross-legged, sharpening a curved knife with slow rhythmic strokes that feel more meditative than necessary. He doesn't greet you, just gestures toward the horizon, where the sky is starting to stain from indigo to ochre. Good day for the goats, he says, bad day for the people. You sit beside him, tucking your robe tighter. How do you? No, he taps his temple. Bone yesterday, said Wind. But goats say something different. And sure enough, you notice it now. Their silence, their clustering, the way they face a single direction, as if expecting something to arrive from over the ridge. You don't need to ask what the goats are better at this than you, Timur. Pulls out a new scapula from his pouch, already burned. He must have done it before you woke. He turns it slowly in his hands, fingers trailing across the dark cracks like reading Braille. He shows you a long split that curves to the edge. This one shows the Sakine-Salilt-Suwind exchange. He says it like a diagnosis. Warm air comes too fast. Maybe storm, maybe dry lightning. You frown, dry lightning. Lightning, no rain, fire. Ah, now you see why the goats are worried. Historians still argue whether these animal behaviors were part of the official divination practice or just supplemental instinct passed off as folklore. But to the herders, there's no separation between science, intuition, or spirit. You watch the goats. You read the sky. You burn a bone. And then you make your best guess. And right now, the best guess is something's coming. You help secure the camp, tying ropes tighter, weighing down the felt panels of the gur with stones. The animals are herded into a low, sunken part of the valley where they're shielded from the worst of the wind. It's all done calmly, efficiently, like clockwork. If clocks bleated and pooped and didn't know how to sit still, the sky is still clear. Too clear. That flat, pale blue that feels brittle. The clouds look like they're holding their breath. Later, you sit with Timur and help prepare another bone. This time, he shows you how to pick the right one from a fresh shoulder, not too thick, not cracked already. Must be pure. You ask what happens if you pick the wrong bone. He shrugs. Then you get wrong weather. Fair enough. As you scrape the last bits of sinew away, you ask him how often he's wrong. He considers this longer than expected. Wrong often, he admits, but also not always wrong in same way. You blink, meaning sometimes I read rain, but only dew comes. Sometimes I read wind, but it is wind inside stomach goats eat bad grass. You try not to laugh, but he's dead serious. Not all signs are for the sky, he adds. Some are for the body, the land, the animals. People forget. That stops you. You'd been treating bone reading like meteorologia, primitive forecast. But for Timur, it's more holistic. It's not just about what's outside. Sometimes the cracks tell you what's happening within. You look at the new bone again, now clean and gleaming in the sun. A blank page. What will it say tonight? Will it tell of fire or false alarms? Later that evening, the wind begins to build not violently, but with purpose. It comes in steady pulses, like breath. It doesn't gust. It moves, consistent, intentional. You feel it brush past your cheek, like a warning in a language. You almost understand the goats huddle again. The dogs stand. Alert, even the horses, usually indifferent to everything except food and not moving. Lift their heads and sniff the air. You burn the bone with Timur as the sun sets. The flames dance slow, hungrily licking the scapula. It begins to twitch. Then split, there's a sound crack. Sharp, clean. A deep line zigzags from one corner to the other, darker than any you've seen so far. Timur doesn't smile. North edge, deep crack may be bad. He turns it slowly. Then he shows you something else, two short fractures near the base, branching off like river deltas. Fire, he says. Lightning, south ridge, probably tonight. You wait for him to say more, to offer comfort or at least ambiguity. He doesn't. You eat dinner quickly that night. Bread, dried meat, and tea too bitter to pretend it's pleasant. The goats are moved again. The herders carry buckets of water, just in case. And then, as darkness drapes itself over the land, you see it. A flash, silent. Then another, still no sound. Just jagged light cracking across the sky, illuminating the hills in ghostly outlines. Then, finally, the thunder. Low, late. Growling like a giant still waking up, dry lightning. Timur mutters, and just like that, the bone was right again. You sit outside, wrapped in your robe, watching the dance of light and dark above the hills. It doesn't rain, not a drop. But in the distance, you can smell smoke. Faint, far, but real. Something, somewhere, is burning. You hold the cracked bone in your lap like a book with torn pages, and this time, you don't need Timur to tell you what it means. By morning, the sky looks innocent again, blue and clean, like a guilty child who's just put the broken vase back together and is hoping no one notices. But the smell of smoke still lingers faint, acidic, curling in the nose like a whispered threat. Timur stands at the edge of camp, squinting toward the hills. Southridge, he says, confirming what the nose already knows. Fire there, Wind kept it away. You follow his gaze. There's no plume, no dramatic pillar of smoke, just a haze, a brown smudge where there should be only pale grass. The bone had been right. Again, not precisely, but close enough to matter. Close enough to change what you did, how you slept, where the goats were moved. That's the point. Not perfect prediction, just actionable guessing. That's when Timur hands you your scapula, the one you burned last night. Its cracks now fully cooled, set into a hard, brittle testimony. You keep it, he says. First, good reading. You trace the main fracture with your thumb, still amazed at how organic it all feels. Like the bone grew the truth. Instead of being forced to reveal it, you place it in your pack. Carefully, later, as the animals are led down to graze, you and Timur sit near the fire with a third herder named Batsock, an older man, mostly beard and silence. He carries his own pouch of bones, worn smooth with years of handling. He lays them out on a hide cloth like tarot cards. He's not a BB he insists, just a watcher, a reader. But his bones are older than yours, some so charred they look fossilized. He spreads them like puzzle pieces and begins to speak slowly, describing cracks and their meanings. One long line, like a river. That's wind from the west. A cluster of hairline breaks around the center. Turbulence, maybe bad grazing conditions. A small, tight spiral crack. Misfortune, usually illness. It's like watching someone read tea leaves mixed with contour maps. He speaks as if the bone doesn't just say what will happen, but why as, though the earth itself is whispering reasons through calcium. You ask him if he's ever read a bone that truly scared him. He doesn't hesitate. Yes, spring of '98, he pulls one from his pouch. The crack is jagged, severe, a lightning bolt down the length of it. 3 families moved early, 2 didn't. Snow came fast, took half their herds. You touch the bone gently. It's cool, smooth, and somehow still heavy with that memory. Historians still argue whether these readings influenced major decisions or were just a cultural comforter way to feel some control over chaos. But the more time you spend here, the more you realize control isn't the goal. Preparedness is. The bones don't offer certainty. They offer awareness. A chance to say, maybe something is coming. Maybe be ready. As Batsock packs up, he hands you a small scapula, clean and unburned. For practice, he says, with a rare wink. Back in camp, you're assigned to help with water collection, 2 horses, 2 barrels, 1 jostling ride across a dried riverbed. That turns your spine into a folding chair. You ask the young man beside you, or Dean, if he believes in the bones. Sometimes he says with a shrug, when they say what I already feel. That hits you in a strange way, because now you realize bone reading is just mirroring, a ritual that reflects what your senses have already started to suspect. The fire only unlocks what the wind already whispered, what the animals already hinted. At what your gut already knew but wouldn't say aloud, that evening. Back at camp, you try burning Batsock's gift. Carefully. Alone? This time. Timur watches from afar, but says nothing. You place the bone over the coals, balancing it like you've been taught. You don't force it. You wait. A crack forms thin, diagonal. It branches slightly at the edge. You study it for a long time. Maybe ... Movement from the north. Maybe ... Cooler air. You don't say anything. Just trace it gently, letting the bone speak on its own. Timur approaches eventually, glancing over your shoulder. He doesn't correct you, doesn't say wrong or right. Instead, he nods. Good guess. You sit in silence for a while. Watching the last of the light curl away over the edge of the hills, the fire pops softly beside you. Somewhere, a goat sneezes dramatically. You close your eyes, breathing in the smoke, the dust, the cold dot. And in that moment, the wind shifts. Just a little, just enough to make you wonder. You wake to a strange silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the alert kind. The kind that makes you sit up before your eyes are even open. Even the goats are still, not sleeping. Just ... paused ... outside. The sky is the color of steel wool. Clouds swirl low, too fast for comfort. There's no rain, no wind, just a kind of atmospheric tension. Like the earth is holding its breath. Timur greets you with a grunt and a mug of something that smells like burnt sugar and charcoal. You're not sure whether to drink it or apologize to it. He doesn't wait. For pleasantries, bad crack, he says, handing you a fresh scapula. Bad. How he draws a line in the dirt. Deep, right down middle. This kind, he makes a chopping motion. Splits plines. Makes people fight. You blink people. He shrugs. Maybe, or animals, or sky, but always split. You sip the drink. Regret it immediately. But the warmth helps your spine unkink. He explains that scapula readings aren't just about weather. Sometimes, the patterns are social warnings of interpersonal trouble, or herd behavior that turns dangerous. One of his uncle's bones once predicted a violent dispute between neighbors over pasture rights. The bone had cracked in 2 perfect halves. 2 sides, they said, neither yields. Historians still argue whether Mongolian bone readings ever served judicial or political purposes, like omen casting in ancient Rome or Shang China. But there are whispers-old stories of Khans refusing treaties after a troubling burn, or of marriages delayed because a scapulous curve looked like a hook instead of a bridge. You ask Timur if he believes this split is about people. He considers maybe goat will bite horse again. Last time that happened took 3 days to separate them. You want to laugh, but the clouds say otherwise. Later, a small caravan arrives, distant cousins from a nearby encampment here for water. And news, their arrival is cautious, polite, but tense. There's a disagreement brewing. You can feel it. Something about overlapping grazing rights. Or maybe a promised horse not delivered. Voices are low but taut. Smiles don't quite reach eyes. You watch Timur closely. He's quiet, watching the visitors the same way he watches clouds. Then he steps away, returns with the burned scapula from earlier. The split bone dot, he lays it on a blanket in full view of everyone, then pours a little milk over it. A blessing. Or maybe a reminder. The older cousin, the one doing most of the talking, sees it and falls silent. The others follow. No one explains it to you, but you feel it happen. The scapula has entered the conversation, like an elder who needs no introduction. It's not about believing the bone controls fate. It's about remembering that nature has already fractured things enough. Why add to it? Timur mutters something in MongolianShort.com. The cousin sighs, nods. The dispute ends. Or at least, pauses. You catch Timur's eye. He just smirks. Split can heal, he says, but only if people stop pulling. Later that evening, he teaches you more shapes. He draws in the dirt. A small ring-shaped crack equals trapped wind or confinement. A branching fracture equals options, often good but overwhelming. A tiny starburst equals something sudden, not always bad. Just fast dot you practice by studying old bones, tracing the scars like faded road maps. At some point, you ask, has anyone ever read a perfect bone? No cracks. He nods. Once my sister's wedding day, bone stayed whole, not even one pop. And rained during ceremony, but everyone danced anyway. You both smile. Maybe that's the lesson. No crack doesn't mean no chaos. It just means peace is possible. That night, you burn another scapularone. You cleaned it earlier, prepared it, just like Timur showed you. It hisses over the coals, then pops once, a single line, shallow, curving upward like a smile. You look to him. Travel, he says. Safe road, no storms. You raise an eyebrow for me. He shrugs. Could be. Could also mean goats will stop escaping. You both laugh for real this time. The sky above is still cloudy, but calmer. You realize how much your perspective has changed, where once you saw superstition, now you see a language. And like all languages, it's full of idioms, nuance, and mistakes. The bone doesn't command the future, but it does reflect the present with startling honesty. You lay down by the fire, your safe road, bone cooling beside you. In the distance, you hear a horse snort. A goat coughs dramatically. Someone yawns loud enough to shake the stars, and you sleep. Not because you have certainty, but because you finally feel like you're paying attention. When you wake the next morning, the weather has turned again. Of course it has. The wind is high and sharp, making the tent flap like it's trying to escape. The goats refuse to wander more than 10 feet from each other. The dogs, usually lazy, and sun-sprawled, are pacing like anxious old men with too many opinions. You pull on your boots, still damp from yesterday's water trip, and emerge from the gare into a sky that looks like it's made of aluminum. Cloud cover, but light bright even. Deceptive. The kind of day that pretends it'll be nothing, right up until it decides to be something. Timur is examining hoof prints in the dirt. Not for lost animals, for patterns. You squint, trying to see what he sees. To you, it's just hoof chaos. Random divots. But he traces a path with his stick and says, "Wind changed them." You frown. The goats. "No," he says. "The prints. They're longer now, more drag." You look again, and maybe you're still not sure if he's reading real signals or just highly skilled at poetic guesswork. But then he brings out another scapula. Let's see if the bones agree. You sit with him, crouched over the embers from last night. He places the bone carefully this time using a new method. Crossfire, he calls it. 2 small fires on either side. Different cracks, faster rise, and sure enough, within minutes, the bone begins to creak and pop. You hear one long crack, then a stuttering, tapping sound like tiny footsteps. The final result looks chaotic, like a shattered ice sheet. Timur frowns. This one says wind too, strong, and soon. You ask what he'll do. Move the camp, tie things down, gather the animals. He shrugs. Nothing. You blink. Nothing. Sometimes Bone says to act, sometimes Bone just says, brace yourself. That's another lesson, and maybe one of the most valuable. Not every prediction demands a response. Sometimes it's just about mental posture, standing ready instead of running scared. Historians still argue whether the true value of bone reading was practical forecasting or psychological grounding. But when you're this exposed, this connected, to the whims of nature, you realize those two aren't separate. Knowing something might happen often makes you move just slow enough or just fast enough to survive. The wind arrives by noon. Not devastating, not apocalyptic, just intense. It whistles through the valley like a rumor, looking for someone to ruin. Dust kicks up in little spirals. Tents strain on their ropes. You catch your breath more than once after forgetting how hard it's blowing. But everything holds. The goats hunker down. The horses turn their backs to the wind and wait it out. Even the fire, shielded carefully behind stones, stays literally. Timur watches the sky the whole time, arms crossed, as if waiting for it to make its final move. Eventually, it does. By mid-afternoon, the wind begins to ease. Not completely, but enough that the animals begin to stir. Enough that your lungs no longer feel like they're being exfoliated with sand. And that's when he says it. See, the bone wasn't wrong. It was just ... honest. You want to argue that honesty and usefulness aren't always the same thing. But then you realize that's exactly the point. The next day, he takes you on a ride to a nearby valley. It's a slow, beautiful trip, hills, undulating like sleeping. Giants, rivers, cutting lazy scars into the earth. Grass so dry, it rustles when you ride past it. Along the way, he shows you places where bone readings came true, or almost did. A burnt patch where lightning struck 3 years ago. A ridge where snow buried half a camp. A plain where the grass refused to grow after a deep crack summer. Every story starts with, we read the bone and Ev, and every ending is slightly different. Sometimes they acted, sometimes they hesitated, sometimes they doubted the bone and got lucky. Other times they trusted it and still paid the price. And yet, no one blames the bone. That's the most fascinating part. It's not about blame, it's about partnership. The bone doesn't command, it advises. Like a friend who's not always right but who sees things you might have missed. At one point, Timur stops at a hillside and dismounts. There, half buried in dust, are several old scapula burned, cracked, abandoned. Family from this valley, he says, used to read here. You ask what happened, moved, or died, or both. You kneel beside the bones. They're brittle now, but still etched with the faint lines of old predictions. You wonder if any of them came true, or if they were misread, or if they were warnings unheeded. It strikes you then, bones are time capsules. Not just predictions, but memories. Each fracture a snapshot of the moment it was burned, what someone feared, what someone hoped, what someone dared to ask the future. You brush a bit of dust off the surface of one old scapula and run your fingers over its rough edge. There's a long, elegant fracture right through the center. It looks like a river, frozen mid-bend, or a wound sealed by time. You imagine someone kneeling here years ago, coaxing answers from this very same curve. Timur kneels beside you, silent for a moment. Every crack remembers. He murmurs. Even if people don't. He picks up another bone, far more burned than the rest, its surface blackened and flaking. This one told of a blizzard. My father was here. You glance at him. He listened. You asked. He shakes his head. He laughed. A long pause. He never laughed at the bones again. And that's all he says. But you understand enough. Back at camp that evening, you begin preparing your own reading. It's different now, less about getting it right, and more about participating in something older than language. You clean the bones slowly, carefully. The sun lowers, casting long, thin shadows that make everything feel cinematic. The goats bleat softly as they return to their resting circles. The horses chew with their eyes half closed. The dogs curl up like crescent moons. All feels calm, suspiciously calm. You burn the scapula with steady hands. The fire is low and patient tonight. Curling around the edges like it knows this is your reading noun, not tinctures, not Botsack, yours. The bone cracks slowly. You hear it before you see it. Then there it is. A single hairline fracture. Delicate and faint, running from the bottom edge to just off-center. Not a deep wound, more like a scratch, but unmistakable. You call Timur over. He studies it, nodding. Balanced. Change is coming, but not yet. What kind of change? You ask. He smiles. You'll know when it knocks. That answer would have frustrated you a week ago. Now it makes sense. Historians still argue whether these cracks were ever codified. Did families pass down interpretation keys, or was it all taught through slow living mentorship, like jazz or bread making? There are no manuals, no standardized glyphs, just memory and repetition and trust. After dinner, dried meat, hard cheese, and the nowly comforting fermented mare's milk. You sit around the fire with Erdine and some of the younger herders. They ask about your home, about your job, about your shoes, which, for the record, they think are ridiculous. You ask if they ever read Bones for fun. Erdine shrugs. Sometimes we ask about girls. The others laugh. One of them, barely 15, pulls out a tiny scapula. This one said, I'd kissed Naran by spring. I kissed her cousin instead. Close enough, someone says. You all laugh, and the fire glows warmer for it. You realize then that bone reading isn't always dramatic. It's not all doom and wind and sometimes it's light-hearted, hopeful, playful, and that's part of why it's lasted. So long, it adapts. It survives. It belongs to everyone, not just shamans and elders, but teenagers with crushes and herders trying to decide if it's worth chasing that one stubborn goat over the ridge again. Timur sits a little apart from the group, whittling something small from wood. Eventually, he holds it up a goat carved from memory. It's rough but expressive, with a stubborn tilt too. Its head and oversized ears remind you of anyone. He asks, you narrow your eyes, if that's supposed to be me? ... He just grins and tosses it into your lap. Take it. Memory of your first crack. You turn the figure over in your hands. It's warm from the fire and lighter than expected. Like most things out here, it's simple in appearance but layered, meaningful, like the bones. Before bed, you place your most recent scapula next to your sleeping mat, not for superstition, just ... comfort. It feels like company. The wind picks up again outside, gentle but persistent. Like a lullaby hummed by the horizon. You lie down, staring at the roof of the gur, where smoke stains pattern the fabric like shadows of forgotten storms. The goat figurine rests beside your hand. The cracked bone rests near your feet, and for the first time you think you'll miss this place when it's time to leave. Morning breaks slow and gray, the kind of light that feels like it's coming from beneath the clouds instead of above them. The air smells of old ash and damp wool, and somewhere nearby, someone is singing soft, tuneless, probably just out of habit. You rise with the rest of camp, your body sore in that satisfying way that means you've adapted, at least partially. Your hands no longer ache from scraping bones. Your ears tune more easily to goat bleats and wind shifts. You walk with a different rhythm now, a slower, steadier beat. Timur greets you with a nod and a cup of yak butter. Tea. You pretend to enjoy it, as always. You're getting better at that too. Today, he tells you. You'll join a group moving herds across a nearby pass. It's not dramatic, just a rotation. Grazing patterns, A week ago, you would have needed a detailed explanation. Now, you just cinch your coat and check the hooves of your horse. As you ride, you find yourself scanning the sky differently. The clouds look heavier today, like damp paper, threatening to tear. The birds fly low. A few small ones even hover close. To the animal's strange behavior that draws a few muttered comments from the herders. One of the older riders, Sarnay, leans over and says, "They smell change." She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't need to. Later, while the herds graze and the campfire crackles low, Sarnay shows you her own collection of scapulae. Unlike tinctures, hers are etched not just with cracks, but with symbols. Tiny dots, carved lines, patterns that look suspiciously like constellations. Your own language? You ask. She smiles. No, my grandmother's. She marked them after every reading so she could remember what they said. And if they were right, you run your fingers over the notches and tiny stars. Did she keep score? Not score. Stories. Sarnay pulls one bone from her pouchadark. Warped scapula with a deep central fracture and 5 small dots scratched beside it. This one said my mother would marry late. She did, but she was happy. Another, this one lighter and nearly whole, predicted a quiet year. We lost no animals, not even one. You look at her. Do you still carve them? She hesitates, then nods. Sometimes, when I want to remember, historians still argue whether Mongolian scapula reading was a dynamic practice changing with each generation or a rigid tradition. Bones like Sarnay's suggest something more fluid. The framework stays the same, like jazz or family recipes or bedtime prayers. That night, you help burn one of her scapulae. It's an old one, passed down, previously read by her aunt. She wants to test its voice. She says, like it's a musical instrument she hasn't played in a while. The fire is hotter tonight, sharper. The bone reacts faster than you expect, popping with a suddenness that makes you jump. A long crack splits it almost cleanly from top to bottom. Sarnay squints at it. Then she smiles, but it's not quite a happy smile. What is it? You ask. Same crack as the one before my uncle died. You freeze? Is that bad? Not? Always, she replies. Sometimes it just means things are about to shift. She wraps the bone in cloth and tucks it away. You sit with that. For a long while, this notion that bones don't deal in absolutes, they don't shout warnings, they whisper wait. You're left to decide whether that wait means death, change, or something else entirely. As you lay down that night, your mind drifts across the spectrum of interpretations. You wonder how many people over the centuries sat up late, trying to guess whether a crack meant storm or salvation, whether 2 small fissures meant frost, or 2 friends arguing, or just coincidence. And what even is coincidence? In a world where the future seems to speak through fire, you dream of lines cracks that move like rivers across glass. They speak, not in words, but in rhythm. 1 beat, then 2, then stillness. You follow the path of a single fracture until it splits, then splits again like veins across a body, or roads across a continent, or choices splitting off into futures you can't yet see. You wake with the bones still in your lap, and a strange thought in your head, maybe the cracks aren't about knowing what's coming. Maybe they're about asking the right questions. By now, the camp feels like home, not just a place you're visiting, but a rhythm your body has finally caught up with. Your limbs move without instruction, your eyes scan the sky without thinking, and your nose somehow has developed a decent radar for goat-related emergencies. You wake before dawn and sit beside Timur without speaking. The silence is full, not empty. The kind of quiet that says, "We already know why we're here today." He tells you, you'll ride to the far ridge to collect old bones. But not just any bones, he says, the forgotten ones. You frown, forgotten, left behind. From herds long gone, camps moved on, people passed. The ride is long, slow, and filled with that peculiar half-silence of wind dragging across tall grass. It's a quiet that hums rather than rests. You see no other humans, just hills, birds, and the ghost trails of camps that once stood where the earth has grown back over. When you reach the far ridge, Timur dismounts and walks ahead. You follow, stepping lightly, as if the ground itself is listening. He crouches near a dry creek bed and brushes away some wind-blown dust with his sleeve. There they are, dozens of them, some charred, some shattered, some bleached as parchment. a graveyard of questions and guesses. You kneel beside him and begin sorting. Some bones have marking scratches like the ones Sarnay showed you. Others have burnt edges, sharp curls, places where the heat clearly got away from whoever was tending it. A few are so clean they almost sparkle, their fractures so delicate you wonder if they cracked from age alone. Timur lays them out in rows. Each one held a choice, he says. Each one helped someone decide something. Leave or stay, ride or rest, speak or be quiet. You pause over a particularly large scapula with a wide, sweeping fracture that curves like a scythe. It feels dramatic, urgent odd. You hold it up to the sun. The crack catches the light. Looks like a storm, you say, or a birth. He counters. You glance at him. Same shape, he explains. Different season. That's when it hits you. Truly, deeply. The shape isn't what matters. It's the context, the story behind the crack, the situation wrapped around the line. A fracture means nothing on its own, but give it a question and it becomes an answer. You spend hours there, gathering and studying. It's like sifting through an archive with no catalog, no librarian, just the bones and the wind, and your own slow-growing understanding. Historians still argue whether these forgotten bone fields are intentional repositories, places where left their readings as a kind of natural archivore, just scatterings of discarded tools. But to you, they feel deliberate, reverent. Like every cracked scapula is a line in a story that continues long after the fire goes out. You and collect a handful to bring back, not to reuse, but to study. He teaches you how to clean and wrap them for travel. You carry them in a sling across your chest, like sacred instruments. That night, you lay them out beside the fire, not to burn, but to observe. One by one, you revisit the fractures, not to interpret them, but to remember that someone once did. Timur sits beside you and says, "Bones don't live forever, but meanings can." You ask him if anyone's ever written a book of scapulae recorded their shapes, their interpretations, their stories. He shakes his head. Some tried, but meaning shifts. What my grandfather saw in this, he points to a curved crack, might not be what I see now. So it's all just memory. Yes, and practice. And gut, you stare at the bones, now laid out like tarot cards waiting for a question. Do you ever misread them? You ask. Timur chuckles. I misread most of them, but the important thing is, I listen. That seems like a confession and a philosophy all at once. Later, you sit with one particularly strange bone. The fracture forms a perfect ring-a-rare pattern. You point it out. Enclosed, he says. Cycle, no exit, good or bad, depends what you're stuck in. You nod and realize this. Bone reading isn't about chasing certainty. It's about staying open to the signs, to the season, to the possibility that the future won't shout, but whisper. As the fire fades, you wrap the bones carefully and set them beside your mat. Not tools, not relics, just conversation still, echoing through time. You've now been on the steppe long enough that the sky feels like your ceiling, the ground like a woven rug that just stretches and stretches. Time no longer moves in minutes or hours, but in weather patterns and animal behavior. Breakfast doesn't start the day, sunlight does. A bone crack doesn't just mean rain, it means maybe cover the goat pens a little tighter. You're riding with Erdine today, one of the younger herders, chasing after a pair of rogue sheep that decided fences are more of a suggestion. While the sheep dart and zigzag like chaos in wool form, you notice Erdine wears a tiny scapula around his neck, a necklace. You burn that one? You ask. Once the sheep are wrangled and glaring at you from under tufts of dust, he nods. First one I ever read. You squint at it. The crack is tiny, a soft wave right across the center. What did it say? He smirks. That I'd fall. Off my horse. You glance at the scab on his elbow. Was it right? Eventually, he says, and somehow, that feels like the most accurate reading you've heard yet. Back at camp, you join Batsak again, who's been working on what he calls the big reading. It's a ritual he only performs a few times a year, a cluster burn. Several scapulae, arranged in a spiral, burned in coordinated succession. He says it's like reading a book. Instead of a page, Timur rolls his eyes when he hears this. He just likes drama. Still, everyone gathers. Even the dogs lie down nearby, ears perked. The setup is intricate. 7 bones, set in a wheel formation, each placed at a different angle. As the fire's heat touches each one, cracks form like fireworks. Some pop sharply. Others slowly fracture like freezing ice. Batsuk watches it all, eyes half-lidded. This is for the next season, he explains. Winter coming. The bones crackle and shift. You hear a high-pitched whistle, and one bone breaks in half. Timur mutters, "North wind again." You don't need translation anymore, you see it. The pattern of fractures forms a kind of circle with jagged edges, a spiral with an open mouth. At the top, Batsuk nods. Early cold, maybe strong snow, but brief. He points to a branching crack on one of the outer bones. Break in food chain. Could be illness, goats, maybe people. It's not stated with fear, just awareness. Something to prepare for. Extra hay, better blankets, clean water. Historians still argue whether bone-reading rituals like this shaped large-scale nomadic movement. Some scholars suggest that entire migrations, sometimes mistaken as political or militaristic shifts, may have had their roots in readings like these, quiet, smoky decisions made around fire pits in places like this. As the fire dies down and people begin murmuring about what the cracks might mean for their herds, you're left staring at one particular scapulae, crack-shaped, almost like a question mark. You ask Batsuk if that one means anything. He shrugs. Maybe it's asking you something that sits with you for a long while. Later that evening, you and Timur walk the edge of camp together. The sky is dimming, stars prickling through slowly. He tells you about the first time he ever read a bone and got it completely. Embarrassingly wrong, thought it meant rain, he says. So we stayed. Then sandstorm came. Couldn't find the goats for 2 days. You wince, but it taught me, he says. The bone speaks, but it doesn't explain. You have to meet it halfway. You nod, so ... It's like poetry. He smiles. Poetry that can freeze your sheep. That night, you decide to do one more reading. Just one. Your final burn before leaving. You clean the scapula slowly. You choose a flat fire, steady coals, nothing dramatic. The crack forms gently, quietly, barely audible. It runs upward, soft and shallow, almost graceful. You sit with it a long time. Then, instinctively, you draw a small circle around it with charcoal. Your own symbol, not for translation, not for memory, just ... To mark the moment, Timur glances over, sees what you've done, and doesn't say a word, but he nods, and somehow that means more than anything he could have explained. The wind picks up softly, tugging at your sleeves. In the distance, a goat coughs in approval. Probably, and you sleep that night with ash on your fingers and stories in your bones. Your departure is scheduled for the following morning. Though scheduled feels like too modern a word for something so fluid, out here, time is a suggestion. And your leaving is less about clocks and more about when the sun feels right. Still, the mood is different. People talk softer. The dogs linger near your feet more than usual. Even the goats seem oddly well behaved, as if they sense you've earned a kind of honorary membership. You rise before the others, slipping out of the ger into a dawn so still. It feels like the whole landscape is holding its breath just for you. The stars haven't entirely faded yet. A few linger stubbornly in the pale sky, unwilling to leave their night posts. You make your way to the burn pit one last time. Not to read, but to sit. Your bones, your practice pieces, your earliest cracks are wrapped and tucked into your bag. You aren't taking them as souvenirs. You're taking them because they've become a part of how you listen. Timur joins. You silently handing you tea before sitting beside the embers. You sip it. It's still awful. You're still grateful. Neither of you speaks for a long while. Then, quietly, he says, "You came for stories, but you leave with questions." You nod, he adds. "That's the right way." You glance toward the herds stirring in the distance, toward the tents catching first light, and then to the cracked scapulae still scattered near the fira. Few left behind, deliberately, not forgotten, just released. This tradition, it doesn't cling. It invites. The bones never insist that they are right. They simply ask you to notice, to wonder, to adjust. Historians still argue whether bone reading was spiritual guidance or social scaffolding. But standing here now, you know this. It was never just about predicting the weather. It was about learning. To see ... to watch how the sky shifts before the clouds. Arrive to notice how goats huddle before the first frost, to feel the air change in your lungs, and choose to act before the storm becomes regret. you mount your horse with the ease of someone who's earned a few saddle bruises. Wave to Sarnay and Erdine, and nudge the animal toward the low path that leads away from the camp. Timur walks beside you for a while, not talking, just listening to hoofbeats and breeze. Then he stops, he reaches into his pouch, and hands you one last scapula, smooth, clean, unburned. You read this one later, he says. Not now, not for a while. You take it gently. What should I ask it? You murmur. He shrugs. Whatever you're most afraid of knowing. Then he smiles. Or whether your goat carving is as ugly as I remember. You laugh. He waves. You want Dot, and you ride. Not fast. Not like someone escaping or even departing, just moving forward. The plains open around you like a breath being exhaled. The wind picks up. The scent of dried grass and charcoal hangs in the air, soft and familiar. In your bag, the bones shift slightly, just enough to remind you they're there, and for the first time in your life, you listen not just with ears, but with instinct. You begin to notice, again, a crack in the sky, a dip in the wind, a rhythm in hoofbeats that tells you the ground will change. Soon you don't read the bone. Not yet, but you will. And when you do, you'll remember that it's not the fire that tells the truth, it's what you bring to it. Now, let's slow down a little. The wind softens behind you. It's one seeger push, now nothing more than a sigh along. Your shoulders, the steppe wide and endless, begins to blur at the edges, colors blending, sounds folding inward, time stretching like taffy. Even the goats, somewhere far off now, seem to settle into silence. Take a breath here. Let your chest rise slowly, like the low curve of the hills at dawn. Exhale gently, as if blowing on embers that no longer need your help. There's no more fire to tend to tonight. Just this moment, you rest now in a world where bones speak in softened voices, and the sky does not shout, but whispers, where knowledge comes in, flickers through ash, through silence, through waiting. Not everything is meant to be clear. Some cracks are just cracks. Some questions don't want answers. They only want your attention. Let go of trying to figure it all out. There is peace in ambiguity. Let your limbs relax. Let the thoughts wander. Let the quiet stretch until it cradles you completely. Tonight, you are no longer riding the steppe. You are the steppe. Vast breathing, open to whatever comes. Next, the bones have spoken. Now, let them rest.